It's my pleasure now to introduce our district attorney, Mike Hestrin. So there's a lot of wonderful things on here. I think it's some of the things I thought were fascinating. He spent a year living in Mexico while working as a reporter. Then he came back and went to Stanford University and earned his Juris Doctorate in Law and Master's degree in Latin American Studies. I always wonder what people did with Latin American Studies. He just became the DA. That's pretty cool. Elected in June of 04, sworn in January of 15. Now, before becoming the DA, he spent nearly 20 years as an inline prosecutor in the Riverside County District Attorney's Office, more than 100 jury trials, served as trial team leader for sexual assault and child abuse, also worked in the domestic violence unit, spent a lot of years, the last 10 prior to taking office, working in the homicide unit. So done a lot of things, doing great things for the county of Riverside. So I'd like to bring Mike Hestrin up. I have a small presentation, so come on up. So I found out we had something in common. I was born in, not born, I was raised in Norco, and I raised chickens when I was younger. So yeah, chickens. So I understand that you raise chickens?
I do, well, I raise eggs.
Eggs, okay. So we want to help you with the eggs. So we actually got you a place to collect the eggs. And we also have probiotics that'll help the chickens with the eggs. And then I went out and we found out that it really helps when it gets warm to give them vitamins and electrolytes. So we're going to help you with your chickens.
Thank you very
absolutely.
much.
Yeah,
Thank you. Well, good morning, Corona. It's a pleasure to be here with you again. You know, I always love the chance to come out to this great community. Let me echo some of the things that were said. You know, you truly have a great community, a great chamber. I'm a member of Rotary Club here in Corona, and it's just a great place. And I'm proud to be the district attorney of a place like this and a community like this. You know, I've been here several times, and I always give you an update on criminal justice or what's happening in crime. And normally when I come speak with you, I give you terrible news about some new horrible law coming out of Sacramento and the effects of that law, or we talk about, you know, the newest trends in crime. Today I want to do something a little different. I want to talk about criminal justice from the point of view of victims, and specifically talk about child victims, child abuse, and what the DA's office does and what we offer to victims of child abuse. The Turpin case, as you're all familiar with, we talk about the Magnificent 13, is a horrible, horrible case. It's an extreme example of child abuse, and really on the very severe end of the things that we see at the DA's office. Thankfully, that's the case. It's not an everyday kind of a situation or a case. However, you know, the outpouring of support for our office has been amazing. People come and stop me on the street or write letters or send emails and say, you know, the work that your office is doing for these victims and taking care of these victims has been exemplary, and we appreciate that. But it got me thinking about something, which is that at the DA's office we file more than 60,000 criminal cases a year. This is a huge county, and not every case, as I said, is like the Turpin case, but most of those 60,000 plus cases have victims, and they need services, and we have to reach out to those victims. And so we have a division of victim services. It's part of really the three-legged stool that makes up the core of prosecution and seeking justice in the county of Riverside. I think sometimes that they get forgotten. And I think sometimes the public doesn't quite understand what our division of victim services do, who they are, what they do, what their mission is. So everybody knows about our prosecutors going into court. You know, they sort of stand up in front of the jury, they stand up in front of the public, and sometimes they get the credit. And then everybody knows about our investigators. They do the great work investigating cases. They're on task forces, they're law enforcement. But our advocates, our victim advocates, I want to take a minute and introduce you to that part of our office and what we do, and kind of use the Turpin case as an example. You know, our Division of Victim Services, they work side by side with our prosecutors and our investigators. We go into court every day, we seek justice, we hold people accountable. Our prosecutors can't do that job without the support of our investigators and our victim advocates. In fact, I tell our prosecutors the key to success in prosecution work and in seeking justice is not being especially well-spoken or giving a great closing argument or cross-examination. Those things are important. But the key to success is being able to bring together a team of individuals to be able to sustain a high level of functioning throughout a case. That's very difficult, especially when you're talking about a case like the Turpin case or a trial that lasts 2 months or 3 months. You know, some of our trials, sometimes we have 100 witnesses, which includes victims, and imagine what goes into that preparation behind the scenes. So we have what are called victim advocates. There's about 100 individuals spread around through the county that their job is to work in victim services. So what is a victim advocate, and why do we call that person an advocate? Well, they're not an attorney, they're not an investigator, they're not a social worker. People think sometimes that these are social workers. Their job is not to do the social work. We work with social services, but an advocate's job is different. We call that person an advocate because victims have rights in our state. They didn't used to have rights. You know, the focus was always on the defendant, on the crime, and victims were long forgotten, and their voice was drowned out by the rights of the defendant. So 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the victims' rights movement got going in California, and it's been a very good thing. And we changed the law so that victims have a right, for example, to be heard in court. It used to be that a judge would kick victims out of court. Can you imagine that? Didn't have the right to speak to the judge about sentencing. It was thought that was, you know, too emotional or too touchy-feely, that we just wanted the facts. But victims have a right to be in the courtroom when their family has been affected. So our advocates focus on 3 things. They focus on services to the victims immediately after, in the aftermath of crime. They focus on services for the trial, and then they focus on after the trial. And let me just break that down quickly. You know, some examples of what our advocates do for victims right away after a crime occurs. They reach out to them and provide services that these folks who've been traumatized, the worst thing has happened in their life, and they've got to wake up the next day and pick up the pieces. And it's incredibly difficult. Imagine the family of a murdered victim. What about funeral expenses? What about all the things that go into what comes next? And so, you know, we call our advocates second responders. They don't go out to the crime scenes like our police officers do. And sometimes our prosecutors even go out to crime scenes. But our advocates are going to be knocking on the door the next day and a week later and saying, how can we help? So they'll put our victims of crime in contact with the different agencies that provide these services, like the California Victims Compensation Board. Victims can get reimbursed for things like funeral expenses, travel expenses, all these kinds of things that you don't think about that victims of crime have to go through. The justice system, let me just talk about that for a second. When someone is victimized, let's think about this in terms of child abuse. When someone is victimized, a child is victimized, we have to still go through the justice system and go through the court process. In other words, we can't say, hey, this is a child that's been victimized by an abuser, and so because they're a child, we don't have to take them into court. We do have to take them into court. And so it's our job, and it's the job of the victim advocates, to prepare victims, and especially child victims, for what's going to come next in the criminal justice process. So to kind of guide them and usher them through the process. So for example, for child victims, and I did this kind of work for many, many years in sexual assault and child abuse. Before I went in to do homicides, that's what I focused on, and I specialized in those kind of cases. When you have a child victim, you can't just put that child on the witness stand like you would an adult and start asking them what happened. They've got to be they've got to go to court. They've got to understand and feel comfortable with the process. We used to take our child victims to court 3, 4, 5 times before the date that they would testify. We would bring them in, have them meet the judge, put them on the witness stand, let them feel comfortable. We'd do role reversal, so they would ask me questions. Some of them loved that a little too much. They would start questioning me about my personal life, and I dodged it as best I could. You know, so it's traumatizing. You know, imagine a child who's been abused by a parent, a child who's been victimized by a caregiver, and now we're going to ask that person to come into court and relive that trauma, that crime, in front of a jury, in front of strangers. Imagine having to do that yourselves as adults. Imagine having to recount the most painful moment of your lives, when you were the most vulnerable, having to talk about it in public and be questioned about it and have your credibility questioned about it. That's our system. And I'm not complaining about it. I believe in our system. It might sound cruel. I'm sure some of you are thinking, wow, we victimize these people again. And it might sound cruel, but it's in our Constitution that someone who's accused of a crime has the right to confront their accuser. That means that the victim or the witness has to be in the courtroom facing their accuser. That's our system. And that system is a protection against wrongful convictions. And so it's a harsh reality, but that system doesn't change when we have a child victim. We can't, and I've had a lot of people say this to me, why can't we just videotape children and play that for the jury? I'm not going to lie, I wish we could do that. You know, that Constitution sitting out there, sometimes, you know, it would be more efficient and easier, but the Constitution protects us all. And if you're ever accused of something, you want those same protections. So we accept it, and we make sure that we get those kids ready to testify, get them to understand what's coming. You know, one of the things that our advocates do, and I talked about how the law has evolved over time to better protect victims. Victims, adults and children, can take a companion up when they testify now. They can be holding the hand of a parent when they testify to give them support. Many times a child victim will have a parent come up, or an uncle or an aunt, but many, many times, and this is how I know our advocates are doing the right thing, many times they choose our advocate because they've developed that trust with our victim advocate, and they're there holding the hand of that child as they're testifying and reliving these crime and these traumatic moments. You know, when I used to prepare child victims for court, I would tell them, you're going to, you know, whoever it was that abused them or attacked them, they're going to be in the courtroom, but you don't have to look at them. You can look at me, and we're going to talk. You look me right in the eye, and we're going to have a conversation, just like we're doing right now. And it would start to get to these kids, to get them to feel comfortable, to get them to be able to talk and to testify in what would otherwise be an impossible situation. One thing I want to point out real quick is another change in the law is that now our advocates, we actually are going to be having canine units at the DA's office, not police canines, but advocate canines. So now we can have service dogs that will come in and further help with traumatized victims, not only right after the crime, but also in the court process. So the law has changed, and it's evolved to where now, with certain cases, we'll be able to bring these service dogs into court when a child victim is testifying. And there's been much research done about, you know, the effects of a dog or another animal on the human brain. And it's real, and it does help these victims cope with what they're going through. So, you know, this is heartbreaking work. It really is. In the police, in the investigative side for child abuse, we've made great strides over the years. And Corona has, again, one of the best police departments, I think, in the whole state of California. You know, Corona was ahead of its time with Project Kids. Many of you are aware of that. What Project Kids was, if you're not aware, was basically a one-stop shop forensically, so that a victim of child abuse wouldn't have to keep going back, you know, come to the police station, then go to the doctor, then go to social services. Everything is housed in one place, and it's really amazing what that does. That, you know, a child comes in and they're interviewed by trained specialists that this is all they do is child abuse. And then there's a doctor right there that does a medical exam or some kind of forensic exam, whatever's needed. And this has really changed the way we not only investigate but prosecute child abuse cases. Let me give you one example of something you may not think about, but if you ever go over to Project Kids, the actual rooms, and we call them soft rooms. You know, they're instead of a metal table and a chair that you might think of someone being interrogated, a soft room is going to have, you know, couches and a little softer approach, and that's where we would talk to, that's where the detectives would talk to victims that are children. I toured it one time years ago, and I saw, and of course these rooms have video cameras up, you know, in the walls so that we can videotape what we're seeing, and then eventually, sometimes a jury can see that under the right situation. They have little coffee tables in there, and the coffee tables are see-through plastic. And I said, why are the coffee tables see-through plastic? That seems strange. And the detective that was showing me around these rooms, she said, because when we start questioning these victims, they crawl under the coffee table and for protection. And we want to be able to see through the coffee table and see what they're doing and make sure that we are aware of their trauma. It's heartbreaking work. It's heartbreaking work. It doesn't get easier. Real quick, with the same idea with the one-stop shop, we're doing that now in prosecution. We have what are called family justice centers. We have a family justice center in all 3 regions of the county. You can come in, it's a one-stop shop. Family justice centers are basically a conglomeration of prosecutors, police, and social services. So people come in, they can get help with their restraining order, they get help, the same thing as Project Kids. You come in and all the different things that victims need are right there under one roof. Let me finish up with this thought. You know, seeking justice isn't just about going into court. It's not just about holding defendants accountable. That's what we do. That's the bread and butter of what we do. We file charges, we go into court, we prosecute, we argue, we push for a sentence that we think is appropriate. But the heart and soul of justice is trying somehow to restore the victim of crime to what they were before. And when you talk about crimes like murder and sexual assault of a child or severe physical abuse, we obviously can't really ever restore the victim to what they were before. Something's been taken from them that will never be restored. And so the family of a murdered victim, we can't bring their loved one back. So we do the best we can, and that's why all we can do in this world is approximate justice. We get as close as we can. And that means punishment for the abuser, for the defendant, for the criminal. But it also means something else very important. It means trying to restore the victim as best we can to what they lost. And if you think about what is at the heart of violence, of violent crime, it is the most dehumanizing thing that could ever happen to you. Violence is taking away someone's human dignity, our God-given human dignity. That's what violence does to a human being. It takes away that dignity. It strips them of their humanity. And so our victim advocates are there to begin the long process of healing, begin the long process of doing whatever little bit we can to restore that dignity to that victim. And we do everything we can to care for those victims. We have a chaplain program as well that for those that want it, for those that need it, offers that also spiritual guidance when it's appropriate. Let me stop talking now and sort of, am I out of time? I'll take some questions. I'll be glad to talk about the Turpin case. Let me say this quickly about the Turpin case. The outpouring of support has been amazing. this community. Just unbelievable. We have now, if you include all of the different funds, I think it's getting close to $500,000 for these victims. And I want to thank you especially for doing the dine out and all the ways that you give. It's just incredible, and I know it's going to be very meaningful to the victims of crime, these victims, and especially thanks to the Corona Chamber and the Riverside University Health System Foundation. They have just done an amazing job of bringing resources together.